Greetings once again, Tubaneros. The city of Flint, Michigan, once popular as an auto assembly plant and staging ground for Michael Moore, has now given the term Rust Belt a new qualitative meaning. I refer, of course, to the lead poison liquid being pumped into its residents' homes as water. If an Arab immigrant did this to American homes and families, you can bet the perpetrators would be facing quality torture time in Gitmo, accompanied by chest-pounding rhetoric from every law enforcement agency in the land. But because it was ordered by one of the emergency fiscal dictators, the so-called emergency managers, appointed by the pro-1% governor of Michigan, Snidely Whiplash, Rick Snyder, it was a-okie dokie until a housewife decided, like Rosa Parks, she wasn't going to sit still and take the shit any longer. I say one of these colonial viceroys because no one can really pinpoint exactly which one of them it was who ordered the switch of Flint's water supply to the open sewer once called the Flint River. If defeat is an orphan to baristas, most assuredly is criminal mischief as well. Such criminality is made possible by the aristocratic feudal mentality embedded in 1% thinking that holds the rights and very humanity of everyone else in utter contempt as expendable targets of self-interest. This is why the oligarchic interests that control Rick Snyder and the state of Michigan think nothing of overthrowing its Republican form of government and resting upon a police-backed dictatorship to literally force their ideology down the public gullet. When Rick Snyder says that government ought to be run like a business, rest assured that it is the code term for transforming you from citizen into serf, whose only role is to pay and obey. And this from a party that still calls itself Republican and bathes in the light of honest old Abe Lincoln. Republicanism in their hands, however, isn't even worth a penny bearing his image. When I say force down the gullet, I'm not merely turning a phrase. The city of Flint is holding its citizens legally bound to pay their water bills on penalty of law. There is a fundamental legal challenge here. Can the toxic fluid being pumped into the homes and organs of Flint's people even be termed water? You can say no, in which case the city would be perpetrating fraud by mislabeling their project and be unable to make claims. Skirting this issue, Michigan Attorney General has, to his credit, condemned this demand as an outrage. I would certainly not bathe a newborn child or a young infant in this bad water, he said for the record. And if you can't drink the bad water, you shouldn't pay for it. He wants to stop the city from shutting off the water of those who can't pay, but is unsure if he can legally do so. He's announced a criminal investigation, promising to get to the bottom of this political sludge. Well, that's all good and fine, Timberowski, but those are just words. Backing off from the one effective way to end the crisis, because it's technically illegal, gives us a hint that the end result of this investigation will be equally toothless. The best way for Flint's people to address the issue is to take matters in their own hands and organize non-payment committees among their neighborhood residents. It's true that the city of Flint has now switched to safe or safer water it buys from the city of Detroit, which it was using before a third party bought the Flint River pipeline and convinced Flint it would be cost-effective to pump river bilge water. After all, the pipes don't care. The city now has leverage to blackmail current water users into submitting to payment by shutting off this good water it's now supplying. Flint spokespeople say if they don't charge and collect for the sewage they served, the city will fall into complete bankruptcy. And you'll excuse me as I choke on this bilge. But that just might be the cure for the neoliberal mentality that promises capitalist prosperity for the few and well-connected and austerity to the death for you and I. Boycott this murderous regime by refusing to submit to what even the state's own attorney general calls an outrage. Let me mention a bit about the origin of the word boycott. We associate it with the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century, as in Martin Luther King's Birmingham bus boycott. Some with a little deeper sense of history will trace it back to Gandhi and his non-cooperation movement in India. But even he didn't originate this movement, which is not, as many romantic Westerners suppose, rooted in ancient Hindu wisdom, but in practical social affairs in the Ireland of the 1880s. The Irish Land League organized a resistance movement against the outrageous rack rents and evictions that had made a Detroit out of Ireland. Gandhi most assuredly knew of this movement and fashioned his own out of the Irish insurgency. One of his most noted cases involved an agent for an English landlord in County Mayo. Captain Charles Boycott set about resisting the organized efforts of the Land League, fighting their attempts to reduce rents and oppose evictions. The Land League in turn directed all tenants not to pay their rent to the estate under his agency. Boycott brought in contract workers from the north of Ireland, and they were convinced to refuse him cooperation. Finally, a desperate Captain Boycott summoned British troops to come in and gather the harvest, and even these seasoned servants of empire refused to touch a single grain. A defeated Boycott withdrew to England in defeat, leaving only his name as a sad legacy of nonviolent resistance to injustice. Irish Landleaguers James Redpath and Father John O'Malley recalled, when with Redpath musing at the radical priest, "I'm bothered about a word." "What is it?" asked Father John. "Well," Redpath continued, "when the people ostracize a land grabber, we call it social excommunication, but we ought to have an entirely different word to signify ostracism applied to a landlord or land agent like Boycott. Ostracism won't do. The peasantry won't know the meaning of it, and I can't think of any other." "No," said Father John, "ostracism won't do." So he looked down, tapped his big forehead, and said, "How would it do to call it to boycott him?" And so the term stuck. So the people of Flint should take the hint of Michael Moore's Irish forebears of America's legacy has forsaken them, and boycott the toxic waste being forced into their homes and children at their own cost. Of course, such grassroots activism is outside so-called legal channels. But when said legal channels only serve as conduits for real poison, at what point do you stop submitting like a slave at the end of a whip and claim the heritage of... Well, I say the old YouTube line hasn't gone dead. Hello. Why, it is old Honest Abe on the line. What's that, Abe? You say you completely disavow Snyder's interpretation of your GOP legacy? Well, that would mean repudiating his whole party as well, not just blowhards like Donald Trump. And besides, who was that in the background yelling at you, Abe? John Brown. Thought he was moldering in the ground even before you. You say his spirit's trying to get out to show Flint's people and the rest of us they don't have to look to India or Ireland, just to themselves at home. So what about it, Abe? Want to cut him loose again? Start up at the north end this time?